Hello, I am Jennifer Moore Davidson. I'm the senior news producer for our public radio station, KSMU, and I also work for Ozarks Public Television, so I'm a journalist. And I'm here to tell you about the National Day of Listening and how you can do an interview with a relative or a loved one. So the whole idea to do a National Day of Listening interview is to preserve part of your loved one's history, preserve part of their story. And to do that, I want to give you an example to get started of an interview I did with my grandmother, Gloria Eberhardt Mettler. And I did that 4 years ago, and I still have it today. So we'll begin with that. Go ahead and play this for you. It's only about 5 minutes long, but we'll just have a listen. I'm Jennifer Moore. As part of StoryCorps' National Day of Listening, I decided to interview my grandmother, Gloria Eberhardt Mettler, who's now 88 years old and living in Bakersfield, California.
Hello?
Grandma, it's Jenny in Missouri. Are you ready to do the interview?
Yes.
Great. It's good to hear your voice. Grandma, you grew up in the home of German immigrants in the 1920s and 30s, and your father immigrated to the United States coming through Ellis Island. Did he ever talk about that?
Yes. He was 14 years old when he came, so he remembered it well. He remembers his mother warning him all the time, do not rub your eyes. If you get sore eyes, you'll get sent back. There was some type of eye disease at the time that if anybody had it, they would get sent back to their original country.
Okay, what's one of your earliest childhood memories?
Oh, well, when I was probably 4, I remember as well, I was small. We drove to town to buy groceries on Saturday afternoon with a horse and buggy. And we had 2 white horses, and the names were Dave and Lady. And my mother and dad would sit in the seats, and mother wrapped me in a quilt and put me down by their feet.
And what about growing up during the Great Depression? Do you have any memories of having to really save or go without?
Oh, yes. We were quite fortunate. At that time, we lived on a farm, and so we had plenty to eat all the time. And my mother raised ducks and geese and chickens, and we would butcher hogs if we ran out of meat. And so we were quite fortunate. But the people that lived in town and lost their jobs, they were real desperate. And Grandpa was one of them, and his dad had a cabinet shop, and of course, if nobody had any money, nobody put any new cabinets in. So he was out of work most of the time, and they just really had a bad time. But Grandma would sew for people, and they'd give her milk and eggs and cream in payment, and so it was kind of a bartering system.
Wow. And Grandma, you served in the Army as a first lieutenant in the Army Nurse Corps, treating the wounded soldiers during World War II. Can you tell me where you were overseas and what you did during the war?
Well, overseas I was stationed in southern England, in Devon County, and we had taken over Lord Vestry's estate. And when I was with the 313th Station Hospital in southern England, we took care of the people that were getting ready for the invasion.
That's the D-Day invasion?
Yes. So we had about 4,000 men there. If they needed any type of surgery or anything, they would come to our hospital.
And what about after the invasion? Were you there during that time?
Yes, after the invasion, they broke up our hospital, and I was sent to mid-England, close to Oxford. And all we did was we would get the people from France and Germany and things, but mostly from France at first, with shrapnel in their heart or lungs, and that's all we did. It was a 1,000-bed hospital.
Wow. I recall hearing a story about you treating German POWs and you taking flack from one particular POW officer. Can you tell me that story?
Well, that was when I was still in the States. I was in Topeka, Kansas, and they they brought in the POWs and needed a nurse up there. And I said, well, I speak German. So I was I was sent up there to take care of the German prisoners. And they were from the Africa Corps, Rommel's men. So they were real compatible and got along with them fine, except my other ward was 3 officers. Well, one of the officers was a lieutenant in the submarine corps, and he was real feisty, and he would come in and tell my patients they didn't have to make their beds, and they didn't have to do anything, and quoted the Geneva Conference. And so I went in and I told him, I said, you know, when you're through in here, I want to talk to you in my office. And so he came in and he clicked his heels and saluted me, and I said, you know, I understood everything you told these men, and I said, I don't want you ever to come in this ward again. Well, he just got furious to think that a woman would tell him that. And he stomped out and he reported me to Lieutenant Carlson, who was the head of the guard division that guarded the prisoners. So he told him, well, he said, you see the bar on her shoulder is the same color as mine, and if she says don't go on that ward, don't go on that ward. So that was the end of it. I can still see the expression on his face.
Grandma, thank you so much for sharing all of this with me again.
Oh, I enjoyed it. I always enjoy talking to you, Jennifer.
And happy Thanksgiving to you. We love you.
Well, thank you very much, and we love you too.
Okay, bye, Grandma.
Bye.
I'm Jennifer Moore, Senior News Producer here at KSMU, and I've been speaking with my grandmother, Gloria Medler, as part of StoryCorps' National Day of Listening. Join us throughout the rest of this week at 7:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. as other KSMU staff members interview their loved ones. Again, we encourage you to set aside a few moments this Friday and record a conversation of your own. And remember, everyone has a story to tell.
Grandmother was quite a lady. She's
Sharp
still alive. Really
She
sharp.
was quite a lady. And I use this as an example not only for the great preservation of family history, but also to point out that our loved ones aren't with us forever. She passed away last December. I'm sorry, she was very special to me. So you can imagine that this, out of all of the things that I own, this interview is one of the most valuable that I can claim. But she was buried with full military honors in California, so I got to go to that funeral and see the World War II veterans pay homage to her and have a gun salute and then present the flag and present the colors for her. So I like to use this as an example, not just because of what it means to me, but also just to show that I'm, really encourage other people to do this while we can, because even people who aren't in their older years of life, we don't know how long we have with them. So I'm going to begin by telling you guys a little bit about the overview, the whole reason we have the National Day of Listening, and then I'm going to point out a couple of pitfalls to avoid when doing your interviews, and then lastly we're going to go into some tips and techniques that'll just really make this a powerful and wonderful piece of history to preserve. The number one thing to remember when you're doing an interview with a loved one is that you're just trying to get them to tell you a story. Tell you a story, or 2 or 3 stories, and collectively that becomes their story. And you can make it as short or as long as you want to. This one was about 5 minutes long, but we edited it down a little bit. So the interview took about 8 or 9 minutes. That's just because I knew I had to fit it in a newscast on the radio. We actually aired these one year.
I heard it.
Oh, did you hear that?
Yes.
Oh, you've got a good memory though, because that was
I remember after it started.
4 years ago.
I remember that one.
Wow, that's really neat. So the important thing to remember is you're just trying to get them to tell a story. And the second thing that I would really want everybody remember is that everybody does have a story to tell. We say that, that's the theme of National Day of Listening, but it's so true. I will be out, I live in West Plains now, that's my hometown, and someone came to fix our front door the other day, a handyman that I got his phone number from my parents-in-law. And he came, and of course me being a reporter, I'm nosy and I'm chatty, and so I got to asking him. I said, I noticed you have an accent. Do you mind if I ask where you're originally from? And he said he was from Tajikistan. I said, oh, tell me a little bit more about Tajikistan. I'm very interested in Central Asia. And the more he told me, the more I was just fascinated at his story. Well, you know, my in-laws never thought to ask him. No one else. I mean, he cleans my mother's floors as well. I mean, nobody thought to ask him how he got caught up in the civil war in Tajikistan after the fall of the Iron Curtain and had to flee with his family, to Russia, and then ended up in the United States. I mean, this is an incredible story. Not everybody is going to have a story about war. Not everybody is going to have a story about hunger, about survival, about, these huge banners that we give so much drama and value to, but everybody has a very important story to tell. I don't care if it's the person who's serving you breakfast at McDonald's. I don't care if it's, the janitor, whoever it is. They have a story to tell, including your loved ones, and you think you know their stories. But the more you get into it, the more layers you see in their lives and in their personas and their character. So that's really what we hope to preserve, because it is a gift, especially to their loved ones, to you. You're trying to preserve their memory, because collectively if it's family, it's part of who we are. And if it's friends or a loved one or a special someone in your life, they're also part of who you are. So a couple of pitfalls to avoid that I have learned the hard way when interviewing is, number one, don't appear to be nervous. There's no reason to be nervous just because you're dealing with new technology or you're in a different role that might make you a little bit uncomfortable, even if it's with a loved one. As a journalist, as a reporter, I have kind of the luxury of being a stranger when I go to ask somebody something, because I think sometimes they tell me much more intimate things than they would even their loved ones, whether it's a veteran or whether it's someone who's unemployed. They, sometimes can't share those feelings or those chain of events very easily with their loved ones. But so sometimes you might be at a little bit of a disadvantage in trying to kind of open a door that perhaps wasn't opened before. And you know what's best on how far to pry, but the thing is, don't be nervous. Be very comfortable when you go to conduct an interview, because that comfort level will have an effect on the person you're interviewing. If you're very nervous or don't seem comfortable with this process, then chances are that will not make them feel more comfortable either. Another thing to avoid as an interviewer is yes or no questions. Now, if you were listening carefully, you would have heard me ask my grandmother a couple of yes or no questions. I said, your father came to Ellis Island as an immigrant. Did he ever talk about that? Well, many times in my interview career, I've had people just say, yes. And if you're on live radio or television, or if you're not going to be editing these interviews, it kind of is a little bit of an awkward moment, because then you have to be ready for a follow-up. I would suggest don't ask yes or no questions to begin with. The reason I did with my grandmother is because I knew she could talk, and I knew she would talk. So if you're confident that your person interviewing is comfortable enough on a microphone and feels good enough that they're going to just flow right through, that's great. But I would really recommend that instead you begin your questions with one of these following phrases. Tell me about is a wonderful one that leads to a story. Tell me about the time when President Kennedy was shot. Tell me how you proposed to Mom. Tell me what you did whenever you got your first paycheck. We want specifics. the more specific the question, the more specific the answer, generally. Now, it's fine to start out with broader questions, more general questions, like, tell me about your childhood. But that's going to get a pretty general answer, I would guess, based on my experiences. Well, I grew up in so-and-so, I was born in so-and-so, you know, at this date. Those are important as well. But to really get what I call those golden nuggets of storytelling, you're going to have to ask for more specific details. So, for example, you know, if I were to interview one of my older relatives, and I would say, tell me, you know, tell me what it was like when you heard the war was over. And you know, my relative might say something like, oh, we were so happy, we were just relieved, we knew our troops were coming home. Well, do you have any memories? Do you recall how you celebrated? Do you remember who you were with? Where were you when you heard the news? Set the scene for me, if you will. And how did you feel? One of the best questions is, what emotions did you feel? And that's something we almost never ask our loved ones. You know, I mean, I see my parents all the time. I live in the same town as them. We're very close. But I don't recall, you know, almost ever going up to my dad and asking, Dad, how did it make you feel when this happened to Grandpa? Or how did it make you feel when, you know, when this happened? Or what emotions were you dealing with at this point in your life? When, you know, the themes of struggle, of perseverance, of love, these are common themes that can be applied to almost any life. They're going to be on different scales. They're going to be in very, very different circumstances, whether they're financial struggles, whether they're, you know, very dramatic love stories, or just a love story that took place over 50 or 60 years. That's something in itself. That's incredible. You know, that's worth documenting. What was your most romantic moment with Grandma or with Mom? Or, you know, what was it about? What was it about Uncle Rob that stole your heart, Aunt Sue? How did he used to court you? You know, these are very, very important things to know and to ask, because we can learn from those. We learn from others. We learn from history. I'm a firm believer in that. We learn both good things and we learn bad things. So that's just one thing. Don't ask yes or no questions. You can have you know, much more detail in your questions. Ask a question that's going to take you somewhere. Another thing is, let them know in the very beginning that if they don't want to talk about something, or if they don't want to answer a question, that's okay. We'll just skip it and go on to the next one. But just say, you know what, this is what I say when I'm in kind of what I think might become, or has the potential to become, a sensitive interview. I say, if there's any question I ask that you don't feel comfortable answering, you just tell me right after I ask it, and we'll go right on to the next one. That's how I handle those situations. Because if some of your interviews have the potential to touch on emotional subjects or difficult, traumatic events that somebody might not prefer to remember or go back into detail on, then that's totally fine. That's totally fine, and you as the interviewer should remain in control of that situation and respect that and just keep going. I want to point out a few wonderful questions that can get you going that are given from the National Day of Listening homepage. And by the way, if you're on the web, you can go to these yourself by going to the National Day of Listening homepage. So what you do is you would go to you know, a web engine like Google.com, type in National Day of Listening, search for that, and then you will be able to click on questions to ask. I know the script is very tiny, so I'll go ahead and read them for you. These are general questions for anyone. So you can interview a loved one, a friend, a teacher, a former teacher, a doctor, a healthcare worker, somebody who is important to you, or it can be a family member. Most people do family members because it's the day after Thanksgiving and it's a time when a lot of family members are together, so it's very convenient. I will probably next Friday be interviewing my other grandmother who lives in West Plains, and I am actually her namesake, or she's my namesake, I'm not sure how that works. Anyway, Lois Moore, my name is Jennifer Lois Moore Davidson. So I'll be interviewing her, and this is also another great example of someone who would be very quick to say, oh, my life's not interesting. Why would you want to interview me? You know, she was, what she would say in her words, just a housewife. And, you know, raising 4 kids in the 1940s and 50s, being a war wife when her husband, my grandfather, was overseas, you know, fighting during the war as a fighter pilot. And she held down the fort, and that was just the beginning of her, you know, adult life. So she obviously has a story to tell. She's 96. She'll be 96 next month. So yes.
If we're supposed to be able to see that the screen, it's
too
needs
tiny,
to be
isn't
focused.
it? Oh, it needs to be focused a little more. I think part of the reason is it's so tiny, and I'm not sure where the focus is.
Can we lower the lights in here?
Yeah, I'm sure we can. Turn the lights off.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me see if this makes the difference on the focus. Yeah, it does. But I think more than anything, it's just too small. So I might just read them out for you guys, if that will help. I'm gonna try one more thing now. Yes.
Can you also send that by email to us?
Oh, I
get a
can.
turn about it?
Absolutely, yeah. And what Kathleen was mentioning is that we can send it. No, that's not getting much bigger, is it? We can send this page by email to Kathleen, and then she can send it out to you, or maybe even print it out for pickup here at the library. I apologize that it's a little bit hard to read, but it's talking about, first of all, general questions for anyone you interview, whether it is a loved one or a teacher or a physician or whoever. Number 1, what was the happiest moment in your life? And that might need to be followed up with a question of why. Again, if you don't have a real talker, you know, they might just say, my 50th birthday party, or the day I got married. Tell me about it. Tell me about that day. Tell me about that moment. And then, what was the saddest moment in your life? Tell me about that if you can, if you don't mind recalling that. Who was the most important person in your life? And again, can you tell me about him or her? One thing I think you guys will find is that you'll be surprised, even by people you've known for all your lives, even by people you feel that you know everything about. You might be surprised, and I think you probably will be surprised by some of their answers. Who has been the biggest influence on your life? And what lessons did that person teach you? Who has been the kindest to you in your life? What are the most important lessons you have learned in life? What's your earliest memory? You heard me ask that to my grandmother. What's one of your earliest memories growing up? And it was about a horse and buggy. I didn't even know she rode around in a horse and buggy. I had no idea. I mean, she remembered being wrapped in the quilt and the names of the white horses, and who knew? I never would have known that. Are there any words of wisdom that you would like to pass along to me? What are you proudest of in your life? Again, a question that we don't really think to ask people, just because even in a normal setting it might be a little bit awkward to go up to somebody, even someone who's very close to you, and say, Mom, what are you proudest of in your life? I mean, I think if each of us thought about it, I don't know that we could just off the top of our heads say what our grandparents or what our parents or our sisters or brothers were most proud of in our life. I presume a lot of them would be family related and, you know, maybe success in business. I don't know. But again, this is one that I would encourage you to kind of follow up on. And you know, if somebody answers like, well, I'm most proud of my family. Well, what about them? What about your family makes you proud? Why are they your pride and joy? When in life have you felt most alone? How has your life been different than you imagined? That's a great question. I love that one. How would you like to be remembered? Do you have any regrets? That's a big one. You might need to take some tissues with you or with the for either you or the person you're interviewing, because many people have said that when their loved ones start to finally just kind of open up, it's very, very emotional sometimes. It just is. Even if you don't intend for it to be, sometimes it is. And I'll step back and mention what we touched on. In a normal situation, it would be a little bit awkward to ask some of these questions, I would say, in most families, even loving families. I mean, I don't think I would just probably go up to my mom and say, I don't know, do you have any regrets in your life, Mom? You know what I mean? But this forum, this kind of formal interview setting gives you an outlet, gives you a kind of an excuse to get away with that and to make it a little bit, I think, much more comfortable. What does your future hold? Is there any message that you would like to leave for your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or for future generations yet to come? Say it now or forever hold your peace, basically. Share what you know. Is there anything that you've never told me but want to tell me now? Is there something about me that you've always wanted to know but never asked? So that's kind of neat as well. I'm going to scroll down, and since most of us, I'll ask you guys, do you have in mind already somebody you would like to interview for the National Day of Listening, or it's still kind of up in the air? And feel free to make this interactive, by the way. You guys, if you have a question, pop that hand up. It's not like we're in a big lecture hall or anything. So, just to get an idea, does anybody intend to interview family members next weekend? Okay, good. Hoping to. Okay, very good.
How did you do your interview on the telephone? How did you record?
Well, I used our radio gear. I did it in our radio station.
Oh, okay, so you were able to.
I was able to do that. However, if you have the program Skype on a computer and you have a microphone, most computers have mics built in. But it might be better to have a little, just a hand, Walmart microphone. There is a software program online, and I think it's free, that records Skype calls. It's separate from Skype, so you have to set up Skype, which allows you to talk to them even by video phone, and then you have to get the MP3 Skype recorder, but you can record that. Yep, and it'll sound just, pretty good quality. I use that in my work now for radio interviews.
So they have to have Skype. They have to have
Skype, yeah. Or, maybe someone could hop over because they don't have to have all that software. They just have to have Skype, even if it's on a phone.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so friends and loved ones, these are questions that are specific to relatives. Rather, not just friends and loved ones. These are specific to relatives. If you could interview anyone from your life, living or dead, but not a celebrity, who would it be and why? I'd have to think about that one. That has a few caveats in it. So if you could interview anyone, living or dead, not a celebrity, who would it be and why? What is your first memory of me? Was there a time when you didn't like me? I don't think I want to ask my dad that. He had four. Was I what?
Or your brother.
Or my brother, right. No, my dad, my poor parents, they had 4 teenage girls at the same time. So, I mean, my mom was fine with it, because she had all the shopping, partners and everything. But my dad, bless his heart, dating at the same time, that was a little trying. How would you describe me, and how would you describe yourself? So you can see some of these are very interactive. I mean, they bring the interviewer directly into it. It's not just tell me your story, but tell me our story, kind of. How do I relate to this? Where will we be in 10 years and 20 years? Where will we be? Do you think we'll ever lose touch with each other? And is there anything that you've always wanted to tell me but you haven't, kind of like the other one? And I don't know if you guys have picked out people specifically, but you can see as you go down that there's questions for grandparents, there's questions about raising children, there are questions for parents and about growing up. I kind of like the ones about growing up, just because they preserve history, they archive history, and I don't care if it was in the early 1900s or in the 1970s or in the 60s. That's important. It's important to see the differences even between now and then. When and where were you born? Okay, so like we talked about before, talking about those important dates, but those are something that is going to be documented already. We know that. But what was it like? What were your parents like? Did you get into trouble? What's the worst thing you ever did? Tell me about the worst thing you ever did. What did you look like in those days? Did you have a nickname, and how did you get your nickname? How would you describe a perfect day when you were young? Do you have any favorite stories from your childhood? And then about school, tell me about a regular day in school. Were there bullies in your school? Did you ever get picked on? Did you ever pick on anybody? Who was your first crush? Tell me about her. Tell me about the first time you ever felt butterflies in your stomach. These are really neat things that, again, if you get too far in, they might be a little squeamish to answer. But those are just really kind of neat things to ask. And then if you look a little further, and again, the library district has kindly said that if somebody here wants this email link or perhaps even printout, that they'd be able to get it to you. School, love and relationships, marriage and partnerships, working, religion, serious illness. I mean, these are things, family heritage, war, and remembering a loved one. So this is kind of a neat area here, remembering a loved one. And you can see that the questions that they have asked are not yes or no questions unless they have a follow-up to them. So what was your relationship to so-and-so? Tell me about this loved one. What has been the hardest thing about losing this person? What would you ask this person if they were still with us today? What do you wish you would have told them, perhaps, and what can you learn from that? Did you have any favorite jokes that this person used to tell? What was your relationship like? Was there anything that you and this person disagreed about? Did you fight over something or experience conflict about something? Like I said, it might be a little bit emotional, it might be a little bit touchy, but those are things that sometimes I think we can learn from. And in some cases, we've heard of people who do these interviews are just so glad that they had kind of an impetus to open up dialogue, right, and have some sense of closure. And people have been able to kind of get something off their chest that they've held for so long. So it's a wonderful, I mean, I am a firm believer in communication, but communication is a wonderful thing in most cases. I recently got married, so we're kind of learning what you do communicate about and just don't. How does this shirt look on me, dear? Oh, wonderful, of course. But I'm a firm believer that communication, by and large, is a wonderfully positive thing. So, these are wonderful things to keep in mind. I hope you have some good suggestions. I'd like to leave some time for any questions that you guys have about the process of interviewing somebody, how to save that information, and any other questions that you might have.
I wondered if you made any kind of outside the interview before you started,
Right.
what you were hoping to do with the interview.
Right.
After they,
That's a great question.
and I'm into genealogy and family
okay.
history, so
Mhm.
I'm thinking of preserving that for the next generation.
Yeah.
And of course, even some of the siblings,
Yeah.
children, their children don't remember my parents because they
Mhm.
died fairly
Mhm.
young. And I would like to be able for
Mhm.
us to relate those things and save them for posterity.
Yeah.
So I think that I would need to tell my siblings, I'm hoping we can do that in
Mhm.
an interview.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, so basically how to prepare the other person, or how much rather to prepare the other person for the interview and to give them kind of a heads up of where this may lead. It's perfectly fine and acceptable and probably even encouraged to give them an idea of what topics you're going to be talking about. And say, you know what, you can even blame it on me and say, I went to this workshop where the journalist was saying, it's so great to get into these finer issues of things we don't usually talk about, or it's so good to preserve our family history, and this what kind of where I hope to take it. I want to talk about when Dad passed away. I want to talk about what Grandma used to bake for us. I want to talk about those things, and I'm sure there will be a few things that I come up with in the meantime that come up just as follow-up questions or spur of the moment off the top of my head. So, it is a great idea to give them a heads up. And if you're interviewing someone you know pretty well, like my grandmother, I knew very well, obviously, you can kind of feed them more detailed questions from the beginning. So, your dad came to Ellis Island on a boat, from Germany. Did he talk about that? Tell me what he said. Whereas before, if you didn't know the person that well, how long has your family been in America? How did they arrive here? Your dad came on a boat from Germany. Oh, tell me about that. So there we go. It gets into that. It's a good idea to kind of just, give them a heads up. Be transparent. Don't go in and, spring any huge surprises on them. But it is a good idea to, touch base with them before and say, I want to talk for 20 minutes, 40 minutes. I'm not sure how long this will take, but I know that we'll value this for the rest of our lives. That's a great question.
I guess the caveat is don't ask the questions before, because I've heard people say that they visited about some of the things before the recording.
Right.
And then when they got to the recording, the people said, well, I've already told you about that.
Right. Or they don't give
Detail,
or they don't give a candid answer. They give something that's more prepared, it's a little more sterilized, it's safer, and it doesn't feel as real. It doesn't feel as genuine. Partly for that reason, we don't, as journalists, give our questions in advance either. Of course, the other part of that is so that people, don't go and prepare a ready-made statement or something like this, just for ethics reason and information reason, basically. But, we do tell them, and I'm sure Kathleen will know as a journalist, you give them an idea of the topics you're going to be touching on. You want them to be prepared. You want them to feel comfortable. You're not out to get them. But for that reason, we don't give them the exact questions in advance, just because it's kind of like, well, and I've had people actually type out things or write out, answers and just read them for the radio. You can imagine how that sounds on the radio. It's like, I am reading a script, and so, it's just not going to sound like a conversation, which is really what you want to have. Any other questions? Yes.
Let's say you are interviewing somebody and you're in the same room. What's the best way to record that? Is that like just do an audio on your computer and then you have a digital file of that? And then what do you do with that? Where do you save it on a disc? And you like your interviews, you might save those onto a disc and then give them to all your the different family members.
That's a great question. So now, thank goodness, in our era of technology that we happen to fall in, we have many options. Many people have smartphones now that have a recording device on them. A lot of them can be saved as a file. If you have a smartphone, or you have someone like who has an iPhone or a Droid, or you can say, let me borrow that, I need to record something. And I don't know how much space they have. I don't know how long those can go, but they can record. iPads, things like that. Also, little digital recorders are very cheap now. I mean, you can get one for $25 or $30 that's very good quality. At Walmart or Radio Shack, that's the price they start at. They can get pretty pricey. The ones we use for the radio station are about $300. You don't need that. Just a tiny little handheld digital recorder. And those come if you have software, or you have a relative who a computer, or you have a relative who has a computer, or a friend. They come with the cables that take the sound from the little recorder and zip it right into your computer so that you can save it and email it, or burn it to a CD. And there are different ways to do it. One thing I would recommend is really taking advantage of the library's help next Friday. The day after Thanksgiving, the library district here is going to have things available to let you record with somebody you care about. So they're going to, be able to give to sell flash drives for very reasonable price, $7 or $8, something like that. And and so you can then take that home with you. It's on a flash drive. You can plug it into any computer. They have little ports, USB ports, and you can hear it on any computer. You can share it with anybody. You can make copies of it. That would be a wonderful way to do it. So there are different ways. It kind of depends on what you want to use, whether it's a smartphone. One technical piece of advice I would give is, if you just have one recorder with one microphone, which is what most of you will have, be sure to hold the mic to yourself when you ask the question. Otherwise, you'll just hear your questions as kind of a shadowy background question. So, Dad, tell me about the time when you did this. Well, I did this, blah, blah, blah. Now, was that when you, it's just back and forth like that. Another option is to do it on video. So get a little video camcorder and set it up just where the two of you are both on it. Or you can have yourself separately, but again, it might be nice to have both of you. Your options are many. But that's something that is usually somewhat accessible. Someone in the family usually has some sort of recording device, whether it's audio or video, that they're usually happy to share. Yes?
Which kind of recording?
Recording device?
Well, the digital file for posterity.
Yes.
I understand that MP3 doesn't have it's kind of like a JPEG and loses some of its quality with age.
Well, the thing with MP3s is it's not going to lose quality as time goes on, just because it's done. Like once it's formatted to be an MP3, that's how it's going to play 20 years from now. However, what you've probably heard in that it loses a little bit of quality is when it goes from the original higher quality WAV file, WAV, and goes to an MP3 format, that's when it's compressed. So the sound files are compressed, meaning that they don't have as much quality to them. However, this is an MP3, the one you heard of my grandmother, and it sounds great, you know, and that's even a phone interview, which is even, you know, a little more, a little less quality. But WAV files, that's just a classification of audio sound. That's like you're in the room with the person. MP3 is just a slight notch below that, and we air MP3 sound on NPR, on the radio, all the time. It is still very good quality. So
don't stand back if that's all you
oh, absolutely. MP3 is fine. Yeah, as long as you get the microphone close enough to them, not too close. But I would recommend also having a set of headphones when you do the recording. If they're on a microphone, which hopefully they will be, almost every recording device, whether it's a little camcorder, video camcorder, whether it's a computer, almost every recording device, a handheld one, has a little jack for headphones. Use those because that will let you know if you're getting too close, you know, and you're hearing, whenever they say the letter P or something like that, it's like, you know, you hear this huge pop in your ear. It's not loud, but it just sounds funny. Or if they're too quiet, that you can hear that pretty well. Yes, I'm sorry, you had a question.
Well, the digital format does not degenerate. However, the media on which it is played
right.
does.
Okay.
And so the instruction should be included with this to re-record every so often and perhaps have a date on there about when it was last recorded.
Recorded, okay. So, you know, it makes a difference, really the main thing that's going to make a difference over time is the quality of technology that we have when it comes to playback. So speakers, for example, are getting better and better all the time. But if you've recorded this, if you have a WAV file or an MP3 file and you've recorded it and you have it saved, it's gonna be there. It's gonna be preserved electronically. It'll be good to go, you know, 15 or 20 years from now, as long as you know, take good care of the actual physical thing it's saved on. Don't get your disk scratched, don't get the flash drive wet. I have a knack of dropping my flash drives in coffee or cell phones. I've dropped them in a cup of coffee more times than I like to imagine. But if you keep it, you know, preserved, and then
make copies.
Make
Don't
copies.
ever depend on one.
Make copies, and also, you know, frankly,
Put them in the cloud.
10 years from now, we will be using something else besides flash drives.
Well, what I'm saying is that the electronic, let's say the sound or the picture will not degenerate, but the media on which it's laid very often is organic, and it does
Decompose or break down over time.
That's correct. And then, you
I
know,
see what you're saying
professionals
now.
say re-record it.
I see what you're saying now. Okay, yeah. So the media on which you play it over time, you know, you will need to inevitably upgrade and replace
When that
over time.
technology comes along that is more permanent, and you want to re-record it,
Save
it'd
it
be
somewhere
awfully
else.
nice if the media itself was substantially intact.
Okay, very good suggestion. Anybody else have any questions before we close up today?
Well, you mentioned the microphone and everything.
Yes.
I can think of people that would be really put off in a comfortable situation, like you and I were sitting at the table,
Yeah.
with having this.
Back and forth. Yeah.
And so it would really, probably if we want to have some really good interviews, we need to get something that will pick up our
Both
voices,
of you.
you know, whatever it would take.
My suggestion, if you don't want to hold a device like a microphone or a little recorder back and forth like this, would be to sit closely. You will be able to hear them. You will be able to decipher what they're saying if you're a bit further away. The quality of the audio just won't be quite as good. So it depends on, you know, whether you prefer the comfort level of having a little bit of distance or, you know, having a really some good volume. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with sitting a little close. In fact, I tell that to the, you know, CEOs or whoever I go to interview that particular day. I say, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to sit a little close to you and, you know, hold my microphone right up in your face. And people kind of understand that generally that's okay. It will, most modern devices like, you know, iPhones, iPads, these digital recorders, they will pick up the sound, like I said, even if you don't move it back and forth. And in some cases you don't want to move it back and forth if it's on the table, because you'll hear that. So, you know, if you're going to hold it, that's one thing, because you're not dealing with wires and you're not dealing with tables and scratching noises. But if you're going to put it on the table, I would just leave it there or get a stand.
And do you recommend transcribing it?
You know, you can. I transcribed part of my grandmother's. It's just totally up to you. There's a lot of
way of preserving.
Absolutely. Or you can even, you know, summarize and compress it and just write down some notes, take some notes and bits and pieces out of it, and to say to hear the full interview, we've got it here if you want it. But these are the nuts and bolts of Granddad's history or whatever it may be. Yeah.
I mean, I think you gave, you know, just a ton of different questions, you can't cover all that in an interview. And it seems like it's kind of nice if you have one of those recorders that you can do these 15-minute little segments, and it doesn't have to be like 2 hours if I'm grilling you, with all these questions, and it could be, you know, at a special holiday that you just do this, and it's less formal and more just, you know, let's talk about this, because I'm interested in this, but you do a different subject matter.
Or even over time, as you mentioned. Then you know, it's nice to be able to do that. You know, you could even take different eras in your life, you know, that tell me about your childhood and go into much detail about it. I'm sure, you know, with my grandmother, I could have gone into much more detail, but I picked out some stories that I knew she had that I just wanted to preserve those stories. And that's really what you're going for, you know, to tell their little parts of their life that make them who they are. And you'll get to see that tapestry as it comes together. But I would really encourage you to kind of dig for those little stories of just what they might consider everyday, you know, funny vacation story or something along those lines. But it really kind of pieces together who they are.
And it's just so nice to hear their voice. You know,
it
instead
is.
of reading the
documents or
the
the text.
It's just not so interesting as the reflection.
They really come alive with sound. Well, thank you guys so much for coming today.
Thank you.
And good luck with your interviews. I'm excited to hear more about what you guys come up with. So keep in touch.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.